Full disclosure, I've known Doug for over 30 years. I fought underneath him in the Desert Storm at the Battle of 7-3 Easting. I was served under his leadership in the 2nd U.S. Armored Cavalry Regiment. We were stationed in Germany and then went to fight in Desert Storm, etc. So I obviously have a long relationship with Doug and have seen him under fire and understand that he is the real deal. And one of the reasons we are so eager to have him on the show every week and why we're grateful for that. But he produced a video of his own earlier this week that didn't get a whole lot of visibility and a lot of views when it was running. And I thought that is just not acceptable, because the message that he has here is something every American needs to see. Even if you're just only interested in knowing more about Doug Macgregor, you're going to enjoy what we have for you here today. But even if you've never heard of him before, this message is one that needs to be seen by every American, because it has to do with our national security. It has to do with what's valuable, what's important, and what's at risk that a lot of people may not realize, because there's a lot of things going on here that are covered over by a lot of happy talk, and there's some risk underneath the surface that's getting closer to the surface, and something that we need to be aware of before it's too late. First of all, I'm going to show you the opening part of his video where he shows you why he's so adamant and passionate about war, because he's seen it firsthand.
Americans, 34 years ago, it was my honor and privilege to lead American soldiers to victory in battle, to witness the courage and valor of American soldiers at a time and a place when death was all around us. Fortunately, we sustained very few casualties. However, in the years that followed, I watched many of the soldiers I served with pass on, not on foreign battlefields, but on American soil, frequently forgotten by the nation they served. In one case, a major who served with me as a lieutenant in 1993 committed suicide. The memories of the friends he lost in Iraq during a pointless, self-defeating occupation after 2003 were more than he could bear. Yet who today remembers the Iraq War that began in 2003, or that the American military intervention was justified on the utterly false grounds that WMD, that is, weapons of mass destruction, were being built inside Iraq? The conflict took the lives of nearly 4,500 Americans in uniform, not including contractors, of course, and cost $2 trillion. At least 800,000 Iraqi citizens were internally displaced, and several 100,000 Iraqi citizens lost their lives. Tonight, I break my silence, not just for the young officer that committed suicide, but for the wives, husbands, children, and parents who endured the crushing grief of loss, who received a folded flag, and were left alone to trace the name of a loved one on a cold gravestone.
You know, Doug Macgregor is no pacifist. He's not anti-war. He is actually for a strong national defense. He and I are virtually identical on that path. He is for a strong America that needs to have a military, an Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Space Force that can keep us safe from any enemy. And if we're ever attacked, that we have the power and the capacity to defeat that enemy. He's unequivocal on that. And he has seen it firsthand. And I watched him train us for war. I watched him train us during peacetime, even before Saddam Hussein invaded into Kuwait. And then I watched him lead us into war on the front lines. And I promise you, this man was leading from the front, to the point that at one particular point during that battle, on our Eagle Troop internal radio systems, one of my friends, a fellow lieutenant, was getting onto the command radio to ask the commander to say, hey, can you talk to, it was Cougar 3 was his call sign, that he's in front of us and he's masking our fire, so we can't shoot the enemy because he's in front of our lead scouts. Now, you can talk about the wisdom of whether the second in command of the squadron should have been in front of the lead scouts, but that just shows you his bravery and courage that he displayed there. So this man knows about war. He knows history better than anybody I know, and can make the proper analogies to go on. So his credibility and credentials as understanding war is almost unrivaled in our country today, because he has not just the education and the knowledge, but he also has the practical experience and the demonstrated excellence on the battlefield that sets him apart. But he also is not for using that instrument unless it is absolutely necessary. And that's one of the things that distinguishes Doug Macgregor, is that he thinks that war should only be chosen as an absolute last resort. And it's important to finish that sentence, because most people stop it right there as a last resort. And then they get to interpret what that means. Well, if I want a certain country to do this and they don't do it, well, the last resort is war. No, that's not what it means. It's not what it ever meant. It's not what he means. He means that what the Constitution means and what our founding fathers meant was that war should only be chosen as an absolute last resort for our security, for our national defense. And that was further codified in 1973 by the War Powers Act, which specified that only if we are attacked can the president use force, or if he gets a declaration of war from the Congress and everybody gets buy-in to it. But it should never be used, as it so often has in the last several decades, as a policy option of first choice. Listen, a lot of people don't understand this, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to explain why. I'm not a fan at all when people say, thank you for your service. When I go to baseball games, I see they'll have this thing here at Nationals Park where they say, and everybody, I think it's in the sixth inning, they'll usually have some veterans or somewhere behind home plate, and they'll say, hey, everybody wave your hat to the veterans, and yay, we appreciate all this stuff. I'm really uncomfortable with that, because we turn our soldiers into caricatures where it's cool. We don't see what Doug talked about at the end of that first clip there, about the cold gravestones, about the anguishing pain that the family members, the survivors, have suffered because of this. And when you're talking about a war that he mentioned there at the second part of that, in the 2003 Iraq War, which was completely fabricated, we were led to war under false pretenses. They knew it and had no problem with our people dying. I'll never forget listening to an interview once with which is Senator, I can't think of his name right offhand. He's passed away. But he was asked on TV, because he was a Republican, and they said, hey, war weapons of mass destruction weren't there. So it turns out that was all false. So we went to war on a false premise. And he said, well, yeah, but Saddam Hussein was a bad guy anyway, so it's cool that we took him out when we needed to. Oblivious to the fact, and one of the other things that distinguishes Doug is that he pointed out that probably more than 800,000 Iraqis were displaced from their homes, and hundreds of thousands were killed. He cares about the people on the receiving end of that as well, not just the Americans. But he is keen to point out that Americans suffer great casualties and great cost on a tiny, tiny little minority of our country. And everyone else likes to talk about, thank you for your service. Congressmen love to do that. They love to laud the troops and say how much we care about them, and they'll give them pay raises here and there and benefits here and there and feel good about it. But the problem with that, obviously, it's good for any service member when they get some of these benefits. But the problem is that lowers the threshold for war, because we honor what they're doing. So if we send them out and do all these things, like right now they're languishing in open bases in Syria, in Jordan, in Iraq, and several other places in the Middle East where they're not needed for our national security, and they are at risk. Many have been wounded. Some have been killed in just the last year or so on missions that don't matter, because we don't seem to care about what happens to those people. And I promise you, the 3 that were killed in Jordan last year, their families are still in anguish to this day. We've moved on. We forgot about it. And we said, well, we fired a bunch of missiles against the guys that did it or whatever. And yay. And then we moved on. They don't get to move on. And the thousands of soldiers that were killed during the Iraq War, the hundreds of thousands that suffered traumatic brain injuries and PTSD, they are still suffering to this day. Some of my good friends are suffering from it to this day. It's egregious suffering. That continues on. No one thinks about those things when they talk about war. And then he's going to move on to the specific issue of this video here, the one that's on the horizon that could happen, and that is with Iran.
Let me speak plainly about what awaits if Washington chooses war with Iran. Within hours of the first strike, Iran will seal the Strait of Hormuz, choking the artery through which 1/5 of the world's oil flows. Gas prices will not merely rise, they may erupt like a volcano, burning through family budgets. The economic security Americans built with their own hands since the pandemic disaster could be wrecked. Immediate price increases and loss of supplies could also result. Yet the cost in treasure stands as nothing before the cost in blood. Iran is not the Iraq of our past wars. Iran consists of 85 million people, fortified by mountains when the Roman Empire was young, defended by modern weapons, and effectively allied with nuclear-armed powers, Russia and China, that have drawn clear and unambiguous red lines. For the first time since missiles stood in Cuba, we face not only the shadow, but the real substance of nuclear confrontation. Not for our country, but for the regional ambitions of a foreign state 7,000 miles from home. We must face the truth that weaker allies often attempt to make their wars our wars. While we assist allies, America's soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines should not be sacrificed for territorial expansions that serve no vital American strategic interest. I did not witness war through the PowerPoint slides or sanitized screens in situation rooms, but through bloody fog of war. I tell you with the full authority of my battlefield experience, this war, if it comes, with Iran, is not necessary.
And that is the central point there. I said earlier, we should only use war when it is the absolute last resort to defend us from attack from someone else. Iran is definitely not preparing to attack the United States. The only reason they would use any of their power with us is if we attack them first. And if we do, as Doug points out, there's a lot of things that they could do in response. Now, many experts will say they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't shut down the Strait of Hormuz because they need their own oil sales. They need to be able to send that out to get their own cars, and they would be cutting off their own blood supply, basically. Maybe that would be the case. But the problem is that we think we know what they would and wouldn't do. And so people are ready to take all this risk. Obviously, Lindsey Graham, Jack Keane, John Bolton, among the biggest cheerleaders for this. Tom Cotton, Senator Cotton, huge war lusters. All these guys do whatever they can to push the issue to get war with Iran. It's not in our interests. We don't need to go to war. Then what does? You heard him mention in there, we should not go to war for some distant country 7,000 miles away. Of course, he's talking about Israel. Israel has been lusting to go after Iran forever. They've been trying to do this for a long time. We've shown you scenes over the last year or so from the likes of the former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, who said this is our once in a 50-year opportunity to go after what he calls the head of the octopus and all these tentacles, etc. We need to go after them. And he even said on one of the shows, we put a clip on there, even if we have to do it by ourselves, we should do it. Well, I don't recommend that. I think it would be a bad idea. But if Israel wants to do that, then that's their prerogative as an independent country. They can choose that, but they don't get to have our armed forces in their pocket. That's what needs to not happen. The United States is not a for rent, should not be a for rent armed services that we give it to one ally to use against their enemy. President Biden did that. He used our military in two separate occasions in 2024 to help Israel defend itself, even though Israel had attacked and destroyed an Iranian embassy compound in Syria, which violated every norm and every international law that you can imagine. And then when they responded, and then Israel also assassinated somebody in the streets of Tehran on the presidential inauguration day, somebody they had invited down because Israel considered the guy who was a Hamas leader, they considered him a threat and an enemy. So they chose to attack inside there, something we would never, ever, ever contemplate from any country on the planet, that somebody that we thought was a friend was an enemy of someone else, and that they felt a freedom to assassinate him in Washington, D.C. You know it's true. Even the most fierce advocates for war with Iran would never, under any circumstances, agree that some other country, for their own reasons, which would definitely be in contradiction to ours, we would say, well, I mean, it was their enemy and the guy was in our country. So I guess, whatever, of course, would never happen. Well, don't expect the Iranians to have a different reaction. And some people think that you can have a limited strike and only take out some of their infrastructure, and that Iran would also respond in a limited way, like they did when the United States assassinated their senior general, Soleimani, like they did in the situation with the destruction embassy, and like they did with when Iran had their measured response before. They were limited. And when Israel countered back, they didn't respond back further. They tried to not escalate. Now then there's this belief that, well, they never will. And even if we escalate it up and not just hit a couple of targets, but destroy their nuclear infrastructure, that there's not going to be a response. You don't know that. It could be entirely possible that they could do everything that Doug mentioned and even more. There are other options that they could do as well. He didn't even mention the fact that all of our troops in the region there, in Iraq, in Syria, in Jordan, and throughout the rest of the region there, would be at risk of being attacked and killed by Iranians in response. If we go to war with Iran, all of those guys will become vulnerable. So that is by itself is another big reason not to go in there. And listen, I'm all about having friends around the world and allies when it makes sense. But we should never, whether it's Israel, Great Britain, Germany, France, anyone, no country on the planet, should we say, okay, you're threatened by somebody else. You may have a conflict somewhere else, so we're going to let you use our armed forces to fight your battle, and we'll kill the other side for you. No, because that comes at a cost to us. See, these warlusters don't seem to care about the Americans that could lose their lives if this policy is put into operation. They only think, like Lindsey Graham, they only think about how many Iranians they can kill. Of course, they're not concerned about that, unlike Doug Macgregor, who actually cares about the people, anyone who would be afflicted by war, and that's why he would only use it in a last resort. But in a last resort, he would not hesitate to bring the crushing hammer down if that's what it was necessary. That's what distinguishes him. These people like Lindsey Graham don't. They don't think anything at all about that. They could care less about the impact on the other side, and they're oblivious to the counter response that would come in return, which has been one of the biggest sins of our foreign policy for decades. We take actions and we don't think there's going to be counteractions in response, and there almost always are. Sometimes they're small, like they have been in all those cases I just mentioned, but you are treading on thin ice if you think they will always be that way and that you can confidently go and take action here and that it'll be minor in response. Because one day it's going to be more than you can imagine. And even if it is small and only some Americans get killed, I'm not willing to risk one American life in the pursuit of fighting somebody else's war, even if it's a good friend like our country has been with Israel or Great Britain or any other friend. I would not sacrifice one American to fight their war. If they want to fight a war, that's their issue. That's their constitution. That's their government. That's their pros and cons and their calculations, however they want to do it. Not ours. We should never be in that boat right there. But too many times that we have been. And then in this last section here, Doug really kind of drives it home and shows why it is so important to Americans that we get this right and what the possibilities are if we get it right.
Washington can choose diplomacy over war in its pursuit of a solution. There are many approaches that have yet to be considered. As Lincoln reminded us, ours is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Let us be the American generation that broke the chain of endless, pointless war, that faced the fierce urgency of peace with the same resolve with which we face the necessity of war. Let us choose the courage of peace over the delusion of unnecessary conflict. Let us choose the wisdom of restraint over the recklessness of pride. Wars occur when vanity and self-delusion lead to the wrong choice, and if we make the right choice, generations of Americans yet to be born will look back and say, here stood Americans who remembered their oath, who honored their Constitution, who chose the Republic over the Empire, and who, in doing so, saved the last best hope on earth.
We the people matter. You have all these vested interests at high places in our government, have for decades, that have made it their personal ambition to support this war on Iran. There's been people lusting after this forever. They have something they think to gain from this. And listen, let's just strip away this pretense that, oh, they really care about Israel. And they say, oh, all this stuff that Iran says, death to Israel, death to America. Yes, of course, they do say that. It's a well-known fact, but they don't have the capacity to act on it. Israel does have the capacity to act on it in the other direction. Everyone knows Israel has nuclear weapons. Everyone also knows that Israel has a far better ability to reach out and strike than Iran does. Ergo, they have been, since 1979, constrained and deterred from attacking Israel. So, rhetoric aside, as I say all the time, words matter, but actions matter more. And when they're not in congruity, you go with what the actions are. The actions scream that Iran is deterred. They want to have regime survival. They want to continue to exist. They're not this rabid animal that the likes of Tom Cotton said and on a show we did the other day, that they're this religious zealots and extremists, that they would take action if they had a bomb and all this kind of stuff. They have weapons and they haven't used them. So even if they get one, and by the way, they haven't, so there is no weapons program to get rid of so far. And the only reason that's even getting closer is because we got out of the previous negotiated settlement that we had that was severely constraining the Iranian side. So if we didn't want war, we would have just kept that on board and to continue to try and get it renegotiated when it would have expired this year. But instead, we got out of it, got rid of all our leverage, and then gave them every reason to continue accelerating their program, which they did. But they haven't crossed that threshold, even according to Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard a month or so ago. So that's where we are right now. I love some of the stuff he said, though, that we can also, though, as the people, we can choose the positive things. And I love that analogy. He said we should have the same fierce energy for peace that some do, like the Lindsey Grahams and the Tom Cotton, for war. And some are. That's why we're doing this show. That's why we do these things, because we have this fierce energy to prevent unnecessary war, to protect and preserve our people. Doug Macgregor values the lives of every American that signs up and serves in uniform. He does not want one life thrown away unnecessarily, even though every one of us understand that we may be called to sacrifice our life if we're attacked and we have to defend our country. We were all willing to do that. But we need to get away from this point to where we are so laissez-faire and casual about the life that we are willing to throw some into this garbage heap to be used in wars that don't have anything to do with our national security, like this one here. He said also this delusion of unnecessary conflict. And man, all the ones we've done here, you can go all the way back to the Somalia situation. We got a lot of people killed there, and the place is about the same today as it was at that time. All that we've done is lose a bunch of Americans, and in the meantime, we've stationed more troops there. We went back after Clinton initially left. All we've done is lose more people, and God only knows how much money we've spent there, and the place is the same as it was before we got there, because you can't impose something from the outside that they're not willing to do on the inside. Libya, obviously Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, all these things that we've been attacking and doing over the year have all led to disaster for us and hasn't been produced anything of any positive. So we need to defend ourselves, and we need to have a good, strong military. And as Doug also says, we need to have the wisdom not to use it unnecessarily, because that's how we can create national power. We can keep ourselves safe. We can deter anybody from taking any action against us. That doesn't mean we can stop everybody from doing something to somebody else in the region if that's what they want to do. And I'm talking any region of the world. We're not the policemen of the world. No one ever asked us if we wanted that job. No one ever authorized us to do that job. And millions of Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans don't want that job for our country because it costs us staggering amounts of money, produces nothing of value for us. To the contrary, it costs us a great deal. So let's listen to we the people. Let's listen to what Doug says there, and God help us if we violate these tenets and with this wisdom, and instead we seek after the delusion of unnecessary conflict. If we ever cross that Rubicon and go to war with Iran, we're going to be in a world of hurt. It's just going to be, we're rolling the dice to hope that we don't have a worse outcome than we had with the 2003 Iraq war, which was a profound cost all on its own. And I certainly hope we don't do that. We've been covering it throughout. Trump is still making some kind of bellicose comments that could go towards conflict. or maybe can just stay in the economic and diplomatic realm. He's asking for terms that I don't think that Iran can give. So the big question is going to be, then what? If they don't agree to dismantle their program completely and get rid of all reprocessing capabilities and get rid of their long-range nuclear weapon or long-range missile capability, which is what many are saying that we're demanding, if we don't get those, then what's he going to do? Because it seems pretty unlikely that that is going to happen, that the Iranian side won't give in to those things. So we don't know where that's going to go, but we do know that there is a blueprint. Doug Macgregor's talking about it, and that's one of the reasons I wish he was in power right now. If he was the Secretary of Defense, we'd be in a lot better shape. But then again, he wouldn't be the president even in that case there. So we have to hope that the president of the United States takes these lessons to heart and does what's in the benefit of our country. He can benefit from it. We would all benefit from it. We would all be safe, secure, and have a chance for enduring prosperity. That's what I want to see us have. And if we listen to what Macgregor said, that's exactly what we're going to get. Thank you very much for watching today. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't. We always appreciate you guys doing that, and we'll bring you up to date on whatever happens the rest of this day in Istanbul with a lot of the things that are going on there between Russia and Ukraine. That's kind of also in the context of